Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar from the Chartered Institute of Export and International Trade about how importing is changing and what updates you'll need to be aware of in 2025. My name is William Barnes-Graham, the Executive Editor at the Chartered Institute, and I'm delighted to be bringing you today's webinar as it's certainly a very relevant topic. For international trade has been subject to a significant amount of change in recent years, whether that's because of supply chain shocks caused by the pandemic and climate change, the impacts of war in Ukraine and the Middle East, or the ever-shifting post-regulatory landscape that has emerged since the UK's departure from the EU. In today's webinar, we will begin to look at what regulatory and process changes are coming down the track in 2025, while also looking at how certain customs procedures, particularly inward and outward processing, can support businesses to optimize their importing costs and manage risk. On the next slide, though, today's webinar coincides with the launch of a new report from the Chartered Institute, looking at 10 recent and upcoming changes that will affect trade going into 2025 and beyond. You can scan the QR code on the screen to download this report, and I'll post a link in the chat in a moment's time. The report covers a wide range of key new rules and processes, including new requirements for imports into Britain under the Border Target Operating Model, updated customs and border systems such as CDS or NCCS, and the increasing importance of ESG standards and carbon border adjustment mechanisms. So please do check out the new report to get a sense of the variety of new compliance requirements that importers are currently facing and will continue to face over the next few years. And later on, we are also looking forward to sharing more information about the Chartered Institute's new Imports Advisory Practice. This is a new package of expert support to help your business navigate regulatory change, master border IT systems, streamline customs processes, and digitize supply chains. On the next slide, in terms of today's speakers, I'm delighted to welcome Ilona Kovka, who's indeed going to be the Chartered Institute's Imports Advisory Practice Lead. Ilona is an imports and digital trade specialist with an in-depth understanding of how cross-border trade operates and an industry-leading expert on the latest innovations and trends that are emerging as a result of digitalization of trade. Ilona is also the lead author of the report I mentioned just now, and she will shortly be presenting on how inward and outward processing support businesses to manage their imports more cost-effectively and efficiently. On the next slide, later on, Ilona and I are very much looking forward to having a discussion with two very distinguished panelists. Sylvia Novak returns to the programme and now works as a General Trade Technology Manager at Collins Aerospace. Sylvia is a former graduate of the Chartered Institute and has gone on to become one of UK Trade's most prominent voices on all things customs and trade digitalisation. We're also delighted to be joined by Grace Thompson, the UK Public Affairs Lead at the Chartered Institute, who indeed joins us having just got home from the Labour Party's annual conference, from which she will hopefully give us some fresh insight into how the new government may approach trade policy going forwards, particularly alongside its much anticipated industrial strategy. So as ever, a brilliant panel for today's webinar. I hope you agree. On the next slide, though, before we get into Ilona's presentation, we're going to run a quick poll to find out a little bit more about you, our audience. So we're here asking which of these sectors best describes your business. And there's a few options there. If none of them apply, please do feel free to say other. So I'll just give you a few seconds to answer that. And while I do, the usual housekeeping notes from me. Firstly, you can contact me using the question panel on the GoToWebinar window, which is usually to the right-hand side of your screen, if you've got any comments or questions. We hope to get to a number of your questions today, though please note we cannot guarantee we will get to every question in the allocated time, which is the full hour today. Secondly, you will receive a recording of the webinar and a follow-up email we will be sending over the next couple of days, so please do get in touch if for any reason that doesn't come through to your main inbox. So thank you everyone who's responded to the poll so far. Let's have a look at the results. So quite a spread, 43% of you are in manufacturing, 12 and 13% in food and retail and logistics, not so many in government, just 4%, and then 27% in other. So a good spread there, quite a lot of manufacturers, which I suppose isn't too surprising given the nature of today's topic. However, on the next slide, I'd like to hand over to the lead of the Chartered Institute's new Imports Advisory Practice, Elena Korfka, who's going to give an overview of how customs procedures like inward and outward processing can support businesses to optimize their importing efficiency. Over to you, Elena.
Thank you, Will, and good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Before we dive in, I just want to make a quick note. What I will be covering today is a high-level overview of inward processing and outward processing. And my goal for today is to give you a solid understanding of what those customs procedures are and how they could potentially benefit your business. So that said, if you're looking for a more in-depth exploration of all customs procedures, I encourage you to join our upcoming customs procedures training and our practical workshops where we cover all of them in much more detail. Next slide, please. Let's start by establishing what are special procedures. They're a set of procedures and measures that allow for the temporary or partial suspension of customs duties, taxes, and other fees on goods that are imported or exported. These procedures are introduced to facilitate trades, support the economic development, and also to boost competitiveness. They have been designed to offer businesses flexibility, cost savings when importing, exporting, or purchasing the goods. It's important to mention that you should familiarize yourself with all customs special procedures and choose the ones that is most applicable for your business. And next slide, please. And today we'll focus on two of those special procedures that are effective for processing of the goods, starting from inward processing. Next slide, please. Inward processing is a UK customs procedure that allows businesses to import materials needed for production, processing, or repair without paying import duties or VAT, provided that the materials are processed and finished products are exported within a defined time frame. Finished goods can also then be released into free circulation if the rate of the final product is lower than the rate of initially imported goods. You can benefit from something called tariff inversion. Next slide, please. Inward processing helps participation in global value chains as businesses can source raw materials or semi-finished products from different parts of the world. Then they can process them within the UK and either distribute the finished product within the UK or export them to EU or internationally. This scheme helps the UK businesses manage, for example, a cash flow, reduce the cost by deferring or avoiding paying the customs charges, and also ensures that goods imported from processing remain outside the duty zone when they are re-exported, makes sure that you are not liable to duties. Next slide, please. When we're applying for inward processing relief, businesses must specify their requirements, including the demonstration that the imported goods will be processed and re-exported within a time frame, that they will maintain through the records of the goods movement, and you have also to secure the authorization from HMRC to ensure that the compliance is there and that we are compliant with the regulations. High level of compliance and track keeping is really essential when it comes to special procedures. And this is an example of information we need to provide within the authorization application. Next slide, please. When applying for the inward processing, the goods you plan to produce are referred to as processed products, and there are two main categories there. One is main processed products, and they are the primary goods you're applying to manufacture, and the second one is secondary processed goods, which are the byproduct of the process, and they should not be confused with the production scrap, waste, or losses. These are required to calculate the quantity of the mine and secondary processed product, and we do this calculation based on rate of yield, and this is a ratio of the input material to the output material of processed products. And we need this calculation to comply with the HMRC regulations. Next slide, please. So just to summarize on a visual slide, goods are imported to the UK under duty suspension, then they're being processed through the process of manufacturing or repaired, and then the finished goods are being either released into free circulation, and the duty and VAT has to be paid, or the goods can be re-exported without paying the duty or VAT. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, quite a few times before, IP compliance is really important. And when it comes to authorizations, all of them, the compliance is the sole basis of authorization. And there are 5 steps here to follow. The first one is to enter your goods within the set time period. And they have to be, the complete period returns have to be completed, and any duties and taxes have to be paid on non-qualifying goods. Then we have to use the correct CPC code for both the goods, whether they're imported or re-exported. And we, of course, have to maintain a comprehensive audit trail to meet the compliance requirements. Next slide, please. I would like us to look at the example of how inward processing can benefit for the business. I have chosen this case study and I have changed the name of the company. It's a UK-based fashion brand that imports textiles and materials from the non-EU countries for producing garments. Due to the rising duties and VAT on those imports, the company was facing higher product costs. So the company reviewed their processes and they found out that those textiles that they're importing can go under significant transformation during the production, and that qualifies them for the inward processing scheme. So the company applied for the IP authorization with HMRC. And once they applied and have been approved, they were able to defer the payments of the customs duties and VAT on the imported material, and that helped them significantly to ease the cash flow. That also helped them to export them later to EU, US, and Asia. So by using this scheme, the company reduced their production cost by 12% and also saw 25% increase in the international sales. That allowed them to save the money and reinvest in marketing and expand their global reach, but also help them to keep competitive pricing in a highly demanded market. So this is a clear example how IP can relieve financial pressure, boost competitiveness, but also support the growth of UK-based businesses. The UK economic benefit in inward processing is significant as well. It allows companies like this one to defer customs duties on imported materials, but also encourages domestic manufacturing and value-added activities. So it helps sustain the jobs, support the UK manufacturing sector, and boost the export activity. Next slide, please. Now we can focus on outward processing, a customs procedure designed for businesses that need to send goods abroad for processing, repair, and then to re-import them into the UK. Next slide, please. Outward processing allows businesses to temporarily export the goods for processing, repair, or finishing abroad and then re-import them into the UK with reduced customs duties. Under this scheme, when the goods are returned to the UK, customs duty is only applicable to the value added during the processing or repair of the goods that were processed overseas, rather than the full value of the goods. Next slide, please. Here we have a flow that summarizes how the process goes compliantly. We, of course, have to remember about the record keeping and applying for the authorization. Next slide, please. For the re-importing of the goods under the outward processing scheme, there are a few important steps to follow. You need to include your OP authorization number on your importer declaration. So you see it's important to apply for it in companies. Crucial to provide the necessary documentation. And the necessary documentation is, for example, that the goods are being re-imported under they are being re-imported were initially exported under outward processing, and that the correct duty amount is calculated that is being claimed as a release. In some cases, it's difficult or impossible to prove that the goods have been processed outside of the country. A good example of this is when materials like sugar are exported then mixed with other sugar before being processed into a final product like jam. In such situations, you can still be able to claim duty relief by using something that's known as equivalence, which allows substituting identical goods to qualifying for the duty relief benefits. Next slide, please. Let's take a closer look at the next case study that I have prepared for you. I also changed the name of the company. It's a UK-based manufacturer of high-performance car components. Again, this company designs, manufactures specialized parts such as engine components and braking systems, primarily in the UK. However, as a part of their strategic approach, their cost management efficiency, this company set up a precision machinery and finishing facility outside of the EU, where they centered focus on precision machinery and finishing processes, so they could access the specialized skill sets abroad. And they needed to manage the expenses as well without compromising the quality of their product, because they are producing luxury automotive cars for the clients. So they applied for outward processing authorization from HMRC, and that allowed them to send components to their strategic overseas facility for finishing and re-import them at a reduced customs duty rate. Under this scheme, they only paid customs duties on the value added during the overseas process, rather full value of the components. And that allowed them to maintain competitive edge while continuing the final assembly and testing in the UK. So from the UK economy perspective, the LP schemes help the businesses reduce costs without offshoring the entire production lines, keeping a significant part of the value of the chain and economic benefits within the UK. And the company itself reduced customs duty payments by 40%, resulting in significant savings in production costs while maintaining the high standard for quality. Next slide, please. When applying for both inward processing and outward processing, there are a few different routes that we can follow. The best one and the most compliant one is the full authorization that gives you the benefit of using IP and OP regularly. You'll need to submit a full application at least once a month before you start importing. And this route is really good for people who are doing ongoing operations and use the scheme. If you're considering this option, it's worth contacting us because we help and support you in preparing and submitting full authorization applications that can streamline the process as a whole. Next one is the by declaration. This is a simplified route, and it's suited for the businesses that only occasionally import goods, but not more than 3 times a year, and they handle their processing within the UK. So it's a bit limited, but it's possible. And then the last option is the retrospective authorization. This allows you to apply up to 1 year after importing or receiving the goods. However, this comes with specific conditions. It's an option, but it's best to avoid relying on it unless absolutely necessary. And the documentation is really a key here. Next slide, please. To close off my presentation, I wanted to remind you or introduce you to the Modernizing Authorization initiative that is set to revolutionize how businesses manage their customs authorization by introducing a streamlined digital platform. This will simplify the process, allow for faster and more transparent applications and renewals. And also as a part of this initiative, 42 standalone authorizations will be consolidating into 5 groups, making it really easier to manage for those authorizations. Rather than handling them separately, you'll be able to manage related authorizations together under one umbrella. This project has been run by the HMRC since the spring budgets, and it's going really well. So watch this space. Thank you, and handing back to you, Will.
Thank you. Thank you to Alona for that really great overview of inward and outward processing. I thought the case studies in particular brought the both procedures to life, so thank you for sharing those. We're going to run our second poll now. This one's going to be asking how you would describe your understanding of inward and outward processing. So I'll just launch our poll in a second. There we go. And the answers are from very strong to very weak understanding. Alona, just while people are answering that poll, we've had a few good questions come in from the audience. Thank you everyone for sending those questions in. One from Harry is, do additional costs like service charges or warranties incur customs duty when goods are imported after repair?
So yes, Under the outward processing, goods that are temporarily exported from the UK for repair or processing and then re-imported might benefit from reduced or exempt customs duties on the original value of the goods, but there are additional costs such as service charges or one-off payments for extended warranties. These are still subject to customs duty. So these costs are regarded to as a part of goods value, and they are part of the services or enhancements added to the repair. So when the goods are reimported, the duty will be applied to those value-added additional services. It's really important to keep a track of those, and we need to factor those into any services. So any service charges or warranties need to be incorporated as a factor, as this may increase the duty liability upon the reimportation.
Terrific. Thank you, Lorna. I hope that's useful. Harry, quite a lot of you answered the poll, so I'm going to close that now and share the response. So thank you everyone for responding. Well over half of you have now got a decent understanding, 12% very strong, 51% quite strong. And it should be said, the Chartered Institute, as Elena mentioned earlier, delivers lunchtime learnings and training courses on these procedures, and it's a big part of the new imports advisory practice as well. So if you do need more support to bump up your understanding a bit more, please do get in touch. However, on the next slide, we're now going to share some more information about the Chartered Institute's new imports advisory practices. And to do so, I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest in Kevin Shakespeare. For those of you who don't know, Kevin is one of UK Trade's leading trade experts who has spoken on absolutely loads of these webinars and various other trade events over the years, and now currently serves as the Chartered Institute's Director of Advisory Services. So Kevin, it's my delight to pass you the mic to say a little bit more about this new service. Over to you.
So thank you very much, Will, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you to Ilona, Sylvia and Grace as well. So yes, so just very quickly, I just wanted to come in to sort of give some background to a new advisory services practice, myself as director, and specifically in the context of today, the imports advisory practice. So we're very conscious at the Institute or Chartered Institute of the importance of imports, and if we think of it as benefiting both manufacturers of various manufacturing, whether it's engineering, electricals, automotive, food manufacturing, and so on, and also the importance in the context of the UK economy, critical minerals, the Aid for Trade agenda, developing countries trading scheme and free trade agreements and economic partnership agreements. But importing is in theory complex, but very important for the UK economy, very important for businesses, and very important for supply chains. So, which is hence why we've had a lot of focus and launching today the imports advisory practices. So in terms of our support, again, we want it to be for all types of businesses, large businesses, medium businesses, but also SMEs and women-owned businesses as well. And type of support would be the likes of international trade surgeries, a 2-hour phone call, for example, on various topics, which can be customs related, can be BTOM, border target operating model related, but can be also around supply chains as well. Now, clearly today, the focus has been on inward and outward processing, and I would reiterate the importance of IP and OP for businesses. And it's quite interesting, I guess, with the feedback in terms of strong knowledge, medium knowledge, weak knowledge, and so on. But clearly, post-EU exit, inward and outward processing provide major duty relief, duty maximization, but opportunities to take part in supply chains as well. And turning to point of inward and outward processing, simplifying imports, we have SCDP. For some of you on the call, you may be familiar with, obviously, in terms of CFSP, the former term. But the potential benefits, not just for RoRo and movements from EU via Dover to the UK, but some of the benefits of simplified customs declaration procedures to get the goods over the border, but also provide tariff opportunities or tariff mitigation opportunities, cash flow benefits, but also aggregation. And we'd be very happy, clearly, at Chartered Institute to sort of speak about those opportunities of simplifying exports, aggregating declarations. And finally, looking at the slide is around SBS, Santry and phytosanitary. Now, I remember speaking yesterday on the food and drink special interest group that we held on the importance of Santry and phytosanitary, what's happening and understanding and navigating the landscape. But to end it for me, it's really to say that we're very keen to provide services at an affordable price, but also that benefits industry and benefits all types of industry. So not just understanding your needs, not just taking you through authorisations and special procedures and getting you through them, but also navigating how you benefit and maximise your business. So thank you very much, and I'll pass back now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Kevin. It sounds a really great initiative and a very timely one, given the amount of change that's currently taking place for importers and indeed for trade more generally. So thank you. Yeah, very great to hear so much about that just now. We'll get to today's panel discussion shortly, but before we do, on the next slide, we're going to launch our next poll. And this is your opportunity to just say if you'd like us to get in touch with you with more information about the Imports Advisory practice. As Kevin just said, it really is a great new initiative to help empower more businesses with their importing and make sure they can manage all the different changes and risks which are associated with importing for sure. Just as people are answering that poll, we've had another really good question come in from, I hope I say this correctly, Janine. So Janine's asked, to use outward processing for goods being exported for repair, do you need to be the owner of the goods when re-importing them? So Ilona, what's the answer to that one?
That's a really good question, thank you. So according to my knowledge, under the outward processing scheme, you do not necessarily need to be the owner of the goods when they are being exported for repair, but you must be the owner of or have the legal control of the goods when they are being reimported. That's because you need to allow the third-party repair services or processing arrangement to be completed and then claim the customs relief on the goods. So you have to be the responsible for the goods when they're being brought back into the UK. Ownership of the reimportation is really important for the benefit of the duty relief. But it's worth to add that we like to treat that on case-to-case basis. So if you're a member, please contact our helpline. And if you're not a member, please reach out for a consultation. And we're happy to look at your specific needs.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you, Ilona. I hope that's useful, Janine. And obviously, there's plenty more support where that come from, as Ilona just mentioned. Just as you continue to answer that poll, just like to mention just a couple of upcoming webinars which Chartered Institute is running in October. On October 3rd, we're running a member exclusive session on further changes being introduced under the UK's border target operating model that will affect all businesses that import goods into Great Britain. This includes a new requirement for safety and security declarations. That's part of our lunchtime learning series for members, and I'll post a link to that in the chat in a second. But I think you've had enough time to answer the poll now, so I'll close that. Thank you, everyone, for responding to it. On the next slide, though, I'm delighted to welcome back Ilona and to welcome for the first time Grace Thompson, the Institute's Public Affairs Lead, and Sylvia Novak, the Global Trade Technology Manager at Collins Aerospace, another great panel. So really great to be joined by all three of you today. If I can begin with yourself, Ilona, I mentioned earlier, and on the next slide, there's the QR code again. The Chartered Institute has published a new report about upcoming changes that importers in particular need to know about, and indeed, as you should see in the QR code on the next slide, please. Yeah, there's a way to access it there. Could you say a little bit more about what this report is about, including some of the 10 rules and process changes that importers need to know about?
Chris. I don't want to give too much away and take away the experience of reading the white paper, but we can cover a broad range of important topics in the paper, including BTOM-related subjects. And in a way, it's an update to the paper we released last year about BTOM. We cover topics like CDS, safety and security declarations, transit, but we also talk about upcoming changes with the release of ICS2, release 3, and NTPS 5, but also 6, like you mentioned. We have taken quite complex subjects, which are ESG, CBAM, deforestation regulations, EU digital passports, EU customs reform, and we try to explain them in an easy way to digest. So I would like to thank here Sandra Cooper, who is our ESG expert, and she helped me to grasp on the topics of ESG and CBAM. So if you haven't heard about those terms, like deforestation regulation or CBAM, I highly recommend to download the paper. It's free. And if you have grasped on those topics before, and you'd like to just put your knowledge into a correct order or gain a little bit more about it, I encourage you to download it.
Perfect, thank you. I mean, it's a great read. I was reading through it yesterday, and it really is amazing just how much is going on in trade at the moment. So I do definitely recommend giving that a whirl. And I just posted the link to the BTOM Lunchtime Learning just now in the chat. Sylvia, if I can bring you in, thank you again for joining us. Ilona's just given an overview of some of the changes coming up in trade, particularly for UK and EU businesses. How, as someone from within a business, have you managed to navigate the level of change that's been faced by businesses since Brexit, really, but it's still ongoing? So how have you navigated all this change?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, Will, and hello everyone. Yeah, there has been a lot of changes since Brexit. I think the crucial from reflecting on my work experiences is the access to the right and specific information is absolutely crucial, as well as the awareness about your own manufactured, for example, product. So, for example, the HTS codes. And its visibility. So like this was the case with the CDS with regards to the document codes when they were first introduced. So for example, extracting own HTS codes from the MSS or CDS reports and assigning the corresponding Y code. So so that was really crucial from that respect. With regards to the CBAM, which is I think it's kicking in January 2027, if I remember correctly. So currently there is a Annex A, the commodity codes within scope of UK CBAM, and it actually lists all affected imported HTS codes. So comparing it with your imported HTS codes, the products will show which products will be affected from January 2027. So yeah, I think the access to the right and specific information is absolutely crucial.
And just on the CBAM, so am I right in saying, and I know you may know this as well, is the reporting requirements already there for the EU CBAM, but it's the financial aspects will come in from the date you just mentioned, Sylvia. Is that correct? I'm seeing nods. So I mean, I guess does that give sort of businesses time to sort of get used to what's required in terms of what information is required just ahead of the new financial side coming in? I guess that's a positive, isn't it? Is that time to get used to it?
Yeah, sorry, was that a question to myself, Will?
Yes, yeah. Is that right? In terms of you being able to disclose the information over well, since October, was it last year? But now it gives you time before actually anything financial comes in next year, or in 27.
Yeah, so the EU CBAM is currently in place. However, the UK CBAM, it will, so there is list is currently available. So if you Google it, for example, go on the gov.uk website, you will be able to find the specific list. But as I said, it will start to be enforced currently in January 2027.
Thank you for the clarification. If anything, just for me. Great to bring you in. Ilona has outlined the significant range of changes that are coming in over the coming years. many of these would have come in under the previous Conservative government. What has the new Labour government so far said and indeed done when it comes to trade?
Thanks, Will. Particularly useful to be talking about this, perhaps off the back of Labour conference, which I've just returned from on a very packed train this morning. So I think obviously the important thing to frame this is that they've only been in power for a few months in government. It's very, very new, and nothing happens overnight. So they'll be consulting on a range of topics at the moment to work out what stances they take going forward. I think though we are seeing some continuity from measures from the previous administration whilst those consultation processes are going on. And I think the big thing that we got from conference was the announcement that the industrial strategy, which has been something they've been talking about for a while, is due to come out next month. So the Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Jonathan Reynolds, he gave a speech at Labour conference and he spoke about the importance of delivering the industrial strategy and particularly in terms of driving long-term growth in manufacturing and service sectors, and also creating a trade strategy which will be aligned with the industrial strategy that resets the relationship with the EU whilst also building new trade opportunities around the world. And he also spoke about making the UK more investable, more competitive, and I think that ties into a lot of what we're talking about with the import side of things. I think one interesting thing we've seen so far is kind of this pragmatic approach around some of the previous administration's measures as well. So, for example, with the border target operating model checks, we saw last week that they've announced that the changes that were due to come into force in October around fruit and veg checks, and they're now delayed until the 1st of January, so that's a 6-month postponement. And the rationale around this is to give businesses more time to understand to give government more time to understand the impact on businesses and to understand the impact of food prices. And the other postponement we've seen, again, I think it came out last week, is the delay to 2 elements of the Windsor framework, so customs processes for parcels and freight, and that's now delayed until March 2025. HMRC were saying that through ongoing engagement with stakeholders, they realised that the pre-election period and the general election itself had impacted on preparations for traders in the border industry. So I think we're seeing this balance at the moment of new consultation on strategic policy measures going forward, but also this pragmatic approach that some of the measures that were due to come in at different points this year are now being pushed back until there's been more of an overview of what's going to impact industry the most.
Thank you guys. I mean, the words I seem to be hearing is pragmatic, seems to be quite a big part of it. I mean, to what extent do you think the level and rate of change that we've seen in recent years is likely to continue under Labour? I mean, I guess to what extent do they have much agency, because it is a changed world compared to the previous Labour government in terms of what's going on in trade. So will we still see this kind of rate of change going up?
I think it kind of depends how you define rate of change. I think from language that we saw from Labour before the election, where they were talking, for example, about doing, on the trade deal side, fewer but higher quality trade deals, that to me indicates an approach where they're willing to go slower on some aspects if they think that the outcome will be better in the long run. I mean, a lot of their language is around, long-term sustainable change. And I think the other thing to frame this as well is that obviously we've got the budget happening on the 30th of October, and so a lot of what change that they can implement is affected by the current economic situation that we're in at the moment. And I think we'll see a lot more after the budget about the scope of how much that rate of change can continue at the rate it's going at the moment.
Thanks, guys. I mean, it feels like so much is hinging on that budget in October. It really is one to look out for. But that's one of someone earlier is just saying we want this budget to be out of the way so we can start to see what's going to happen in terms of regulatory change and supply side and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, very interesting times coming up for sure. I'd like to move on to a different area now, something which the report discusses a fair bit, which is the digitalization of trade processes, whether that's digitizing documents or new systems like CDS and so on. Sylvia, I know this is a real big area for you. So in what ways do you think digital trade can reduce cross-border delays and inefficiencies in imports and customs clearance processes?
In so many ways. That's the short answer. But let me give you some examples. So I think can take the business perspective and the customs authorities perspective. So from the business perspective, the trade information flow mechanisms, such as the supplier sending the shipment data into importer systems straight into importer systems. So for example, the ASNs, the advanced shipment notices, self-declarations and the system connections. It also depends on the type of goods and the supply chain locations, but companies can consider the automation on various elements, for example, the preferential origin calculations, the HTS automation. So in terms of some of the freight forwarders also utilize a OCR technology as well. So for example, extracting the shipment data from the documents and feeding them directly into the customs declarations systems. So this is where the digital trade can be used. Also using various different or linking various different customs procedures, like for example, Kevin mentioned the CFSP, former CFSP, which is now SCDP, and linking that with the customs declarations softwares, for instance. From the authorities' perspective, the digital trade can take various forms. So, for example, incorporation of the specific AI parameters to target the high-risk shipments, so the legitimate goods can cross the borders smoothly. Incorporation of the Internet of Things, so things like usage of the drones, the container scanners, the RFID technology. Also, when it comes to the road freight, the automated license plate readers, and I think one of the crucial things is the system's interoperability. So here we're talking about the business to customs and also customs to customs connections. We should all be adapting for smarter borders and trade. So I hope I did answer your question.
That was a great answer. There's a lot of information there. I was just trying to absorb it. It's really exciting stuff, and the interoperability thing seems really, really important as well. I mean, just on that, I mean, what do you think are the biggest barriers or challenges companies may face when it comes to implementing digital trade solutions, and kind of what practical tips would you give for overcoming these challenges?
Reflecting on my past work experiences, working in the large organizations, it can be the approval systems and the whole bureaucracy behind the processes to implement something new or conduct a new project that could be a bit of a barrier. For the SMEs, that's definitely the lack of the funding, the budget, or less investment possibilities, and the smaller resources. A barrier can be also a lack of knowledge on either the customs processes itself or the actual digital solutions, or the lack of product or supply chain visibility. That can also be a big barrier.
Thank you, Sylvia. Great answer once again. I mean, Grace, just to bring it back into the policy kind of space. I mean, what has Labour so far said in regards to digitalisation and maybe the modernisation of the border?
Thanks, Will. I think the digitalisation of trade agenda is really seen as central by the new government. We actually released a report just a few weeks ago as part of the remit of our organisation as chair of the E-commerce Trade Commission, and that specifically looked at a few different areas of boosting trade tech adoption for SMEs, as well as improving access to emerging markets and supporting female-led businesses. And the Exports Minister gave us a supportive quote for that, and basically emphasised that he's really working with industry to boost digital trade, so that more small firms can export around the world, and also interweaving that digitalization of trade agenda, both import and export wise, in order to feed into the industrial strategy and deliver long-term stable growth that supports skilled jobs. So I think it's really seen as central. I mean, all the discussions that we've had with ministers and officials so far, it's seen as the future of international trade, and indeed it is. So there's so much scope, as we know, for cost saving, even from looking at the previous administration's ecosystem of trust pilots that the Cabinet Office ran, where costs were shown to reduce by, I think, about 30% in terms of customs costs when you ran a digital trade pilot. And so I think if you look at those learnings and take them forward, there's a lot of scope for what can be done in terms of scaling up digital trade pilots, for example, potentially under a new government.
Watch this space seems to be the thing, and it was called the Borders and Meteorology Bill or something like that. It's got a very interesting
Meteorology,
name.
Yes, yeah.
I never say that word, but
there's a lot to be watching out for.
Yeah, terrific stuff. And just another area when it comes to the future of trade and to bring Ilona back in, quite a lot of the changes in the report are quite environmental in nature. We've mentioned CBAM already, but there's also ESG, and also in the EU and UK, there's deforestation regulation as well. So my sort of question is, if Brexit has been the major concern in recent years, is it fair to say that climate is going to increasingly become the big thing when it comes to regulatory and process change for businesses?
Yes, I can fully agree. Climate is like a change and becoming a major concern for businesses, which was the EU exit in the recent years. There is a pressure from the government, regulators, and consumers as well. Companies, they're being pushed to adopt more sustainable practices to reduce the carbon footprint and to comply with all those emerging climate-related regulations. The focus is on shifting towards sustainability, climate-related risk, opportunities, and to change the impact of the businesses when it comes to strategies and operations for the very near future. We have net zero in UK. We have neutral by 2050 in EU. We have all those regulatory changes, the supply chain disruptions that are also affecting sustainability expectations from people. I believe from consumers is the main factor. I'm really happy as a consumer that we are becoming more aware of those impacts on the nature, and we're more conscious and aware that we need to take care of the mother nature. So really happy to see those coming in, and the government being focused on bringing us closer to net zero, and the supply chains have a really big impact on that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's an issue which feels a bit even bigger than Brexit, to say the least. I'm just wondering as well, Grace, just to kind of bring you in on this, Labour's talked a lot about things like green export hubs and things like that, and they obviously had their previous green plan, which obviously got shelved to some extent, but it still probably isn't completely shelved. So kind of what's Labour kind of thinking in terms of, how to weave in more of a climate aspect into international trade policy?
That's a really interesting question. I think two answers here, and obviously this isn't, I'm not speaking for the government, so it's not comprehensive, but two things I'd say. One is there's a lot of talk around regional growth and what can be done actually through more devolution to regions in terms of transport and some trade elements, and I do wonder whether perhaps there's an opportunity through that greater, I suppose, devolutionary aspect of policy for Labour to implement more green measures through regional empowerment, and kind of tied into that. One thing that Labour were emphasising in the run-up to the election was that through their free trade agreements, they wanted to be able to empower regions more directly, and also to put more ESG considerations within the free trade agreements that they were negotiating. And so again, there, I think we see an indication of the kind of standards they'd like to have within negotiations with other countries. So as I say, not speaking for the government, but just from what I've seen, I think those kind of two areas of trade agreements and also devolution to regions might be ways in which they can weave in some of their sort of climate goals.
Terrific. Thank you, Grace. Thank you, Ilona, as well. A really interesting area. But at this point, we're going to move towards audience questions in a moment. But on the next slide, we're going to run our next poll. This one is to ask what you think the government should prioritise regarding imports when it comes to its upcoming industrial and trade strategies. And as people are answering that poll, Grace, you're in regular contact with decision makers in government, particularly DBT, Department of Business and Trade. What is the Chartered Institute kind of looking to see from the new government when it comes to support for importers?
Yeah, thank you, Will. I think really what we'd like to see is, a comprehensive import and export strategy. We've basically been calling for that for as long as I've been at the Institute, for about 2 years. And I think that the trade strategy, which they've said will be aligned with the industrial strategy, will be a natural opportunity actually to weave together that import and export strategy, because stakeholders on the call may remember that we've had various iterations of export strategies over the years, but actually we need to have the import aspect weaved in naturally, because one affects the other by default. And so actually being able to bring that together under one kind of strategic document, and then having that aligned with the industrial strategy, we think will be quite significant and hopefully helpful as a framework for businesses going forward. I think it's important to say that we don't entirely know at this point what that looks like in terms of the overlap and the alignment of the industrial strategy and the trade strategy, because we haven't heard definitively yet when the trade strategy is going to be consulted on. So I think that element is TBC, but we're certainly going to be putting forward to government that we think that having that comprehensive import-export strategy as part of the trade strategy is going to provide business certainty and be a useful framework.
Thanks, Grace. And also, members of Institute and indeed the wider trader network can always feed in their own views into the Chartered Institute about what they want to see from government in its trade and industrial plans. I'm just going to close the poll. Thank you everyone once again for responding. Oops, let's try and share that again. So 34% of you say the government should prioritise education for businesses, so whether that's kind of skills building or building kind of skills around importing, supply chains, manufacturing, all that sort of stuff. So really interesting response there, 34%. 32% vote just behind reducing regulatory red tape, and I guess that's not too surprising in its post-Brexit regulatory landscape. But following on from what we're talking about earlier with Ilona and Sylvia, 24% are really valuing digitalised interoperable systems, and obviously we've heard about the benefits that could bring in. So thank you everyone for responding to that poll, really informative response. On the next slide, we are going to start going to some of your questions. We have some great questions come through. Thank you everyone for responding. I'll start with one from Madison, and I've been messaging Kevin in the background. You may want to come in on this one. Kevin, Madison asks, are GB safety and security declarations or entry summary declarations going ahead on the 31st of October, or is there going to be a delay?
Thank you for the question. It's a really good question. It's been a question that's received lots of thought, and I've been questioned a lot in the last few days on this. So as it stands, it's still going ahead. We're very aware that there's been several announcements in terms of SPS and medium risk goods from the EU to GB on the Windsor framework. There's been no announcement yet on the EU ENS, the entry safety and security declarations. We were possibly, there's lots of rumours going around as to whether it will take place on at the end of this month. We have to work on the basis it still is. There is a JCCC, Joint Customs Consultative Committee meeting on the 3rd of October, which we are heavily involved in at Chartered Institute. It is on the agenda along with Windsor Framework and Single Trade Window, but as it stands at the moment, we have to work on the basis it's going ahead, notwithstanding the rumours. Just like a call last Friday, urgent call on the winter framework, we may have an urgent call this Friday on safety and security declarations, but we wait and see. So I'm afraid that's not a definitive answer, but we will keep everyone advised as soon we can. But there's been no announcement yet on any potential extension to safety and security declarations. Doesn't mean there won't be one. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. And the Institute's daily update newsletter, which goes out every day, unsurprisingly, will post any updates regarding that. So do subscribe to that if you're not already a subscriber. So a question's come in from Ivan or Ivan earlier. This was about IP. So this is for Elena. Ivan asks, is it possible for direct landings of fish, for example, Norwegian fish landed into Scotland from a Norwegian fishing boat, to enter under IP?
This is a really interesting question. I really love that question. I would love to work on that case. I believe that if you're a member, please reach out to us, and we would like to treat that on case by case. It's really good to just go through the documents, go through your business processes, and establish the best case of doing that. So I am just encouraging you to reach out to us. We will try to sort it out for you.
Terrific. Thanks, Elena. So yeah, get in touch with Van. It's one of those questions where it seems really interesting, but it's maybe we need a bit more information to kind of give the best answer. But yeah, great question, really great scenario as well. Another question we had in from Laura, which is, how far along has the government got in its project to modernise customs authorisations, and how likely is Labour going to continue with this? So Ilona, I think, to begin with that one. So how far along has the government got into modernising authorisations?
So I'm happy to be a part of the JCCC group that is taking care of this project. And it's in its final stages. We've been collaborating closely with HMRC, JCCC, as well as with a group of industry experts on this project to support it. And it stems from the spring budget, like I mentioned before, and it's on final stages. It will simplify all those customs authorization applications, digitalize them. We're waiting for the digital platform to be launched. Watch this space, and it's going to come soon. All the groundwork, I believe, is completed. We supported the government on looking at how to guide the traders best on guidances as well, so they're the best pilots for everybody on a high or low technical level of advancement. So I expect it to be really, really good and encouraging and supportive.
Terrific, thank you, Elena. I hope that's useful. Laura, seems an exciting watch this space. Just before we go to the closing stages, I just want to go back to the poll actually, because it was messaging Grace in the background, and it's an interesting response, isn't it, Grace? 34% saying education. You said it was you found that really interesting. So kind of could you say a bit more about kind of what does this mean? Kind of what should we take from this?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting here is anyone who might have watched the Prime Minister's speech yesterday, he put quite an emphasis actually on this area of education and ensuring the correct skills mix for the United Kingdom going forward, particularly in relation to the work that's been done with Skills England, which is a new body that's been set up to work out what the exact skills mix is that the UK needs in order to thrive economically going forward. And in fact, Skills England have even put out their first report laying out initial findings on that, which you can find online. So I think from that aspect, it's quite interesting that education for businesses is cropping up again. It's obviously identified as an industry need and also identified by government. And also, I think in terms of some of the import aspects, when we're thinking about border target operating model, for example, certainly with different EU countries that we talk to on a regular basis, some of them are quite confused. Some of the business groups over there are quite confused about the BITOM rules or have been in the past. And so actually that element of education is also important as well, of supporting businesses to understand how do they trade efficiently with the UK from other countries. So I think slightly two-pronged answer there. One about the skills mix in the UK itself, but also about how do we educate businesses from beyond the UK in trading with the UK.
It's a really important point. And also that's where people like Ilona and the various trade experts at the Institute come in. We're very much there to support and educate. We're not the only ones, but I'd like to think we're the best. So yeah, definitely do get in touch with us if you do need some more educational training or whatever when it comes to these new rules. However, I'm sadly going to start wrapping things up on the next slide. So thank you once again to Grace, Sylvia, Ilona and Kevin for joining us today and giving us such great insight into what's coming up for importers over the next few years, and some great tips as well about how to sort of manage all this change as well. Just like to remind listeners that the Chartered Institute has indeed both launched a report and a new advisory practice for importers today. You can scan the QR code on the left-hand side to download the report on 10 key rules and process changes that importers need to know about as we enter 2025, from CDS to CBAMs and ESG to new safety and security declaration requirements. You can scan the QR code on the right-hand side to find out how we can support you to navigate these changes through the new Imports Advisory practice that Ilona is indeed leading. This new practice will help UK importers navigate regulations, master systems, streamline processes, and digitize supply chains. So please do scan the second QR code to find out what services Ilona and co will be offering to do just this. I'll leave a slide on the screen for a few minutes before we go. Remember that we will be sending the slides and recording of today's webinar in a follow-up email, which you should get in the next day or so. This email will also include a link to the report and practice we've launched today. Please get in touch if for any reason this email doesn't come through to your main inbox. As you leave, please do let us know what you thought of today's sessions and any suggestions or future events by completing the short exit survey. But for now, all that's left for me to say is thank you for joining us and goodbye.